A group of leather-clad bikers rolled into a quiet family diner on a Sunday morning, their motorcycles rumbling outside like distant thunder. The owner, a man who prided himself on running a respectable establishment, took one look at their worn jackets and weathered faces and made his judgment. Within minutes, he was demanding they leave, his voice cutting through the breakfast chatter as he told them their kind had no place among decent families. The other diners watched in uncomfortable silence as the bikers stood there, dignified despite the public humiliation. But then a 9-year-old girl rose from her booth, her small voice carrying across the room as she spoke one sentence that would change everything. What she said next left the owner speechless and exposed a truth he never saw coming. The morning sun cast long shadows across Highway 27 as 5 motorcycles rumbled toward the small town of Millbrook, their engines creating a steady rhythm that echoed off the surrounding hills. At the front of the formation rode Marcus Thompson, a man in his early 60s whose weathered face told stories of decades spent under open skies. His leather vest bore patches from his time in Vietnam, faded but worn with quiet pride, and his salt and pepper beard moved slightly in the wind as he navigated the curves of the rural road. Behind him rode 4 companions, each wearing similar leather vests marked with the emblem of the Veterans Charity Riders, their motorcycles gleaming in the autumn sunlight despite the dust of 200 miles already traveled. Jake, a broad-shouldered man with arms covered in tattoos, rode to Marcus's left, while Tommy, younger but no less weathered, held position on the right. Diane, the only woman in the group, her gray hair pulled back in a tight braid, rode fourth, and Russell, a man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, brought up the rear. As they entered Millbrook's main street, Marcus raised his hand in the signal to slow down, respecting the quiet Sunday morning atmosphere of the town where families walked toward the white-steepled church on the corner. Near the grocery store, they spotted an elderly woman struggling with bags that threatened to spill from her arms, and without a word, Marcus pulled over, his companions following his lead. The woman's initial alarm at the sight of 5 bikers approaching melted into gratitude as Jake and Tommy gently took her bags and carried them to her car, refusing her offers of payment with polite smiles and simple words about being happy to help. Children on the sidewalk pointed at the motorcycles with wide eyes, and instead of roaring away, Marcus waved to them kindly. His gesture returned with shy smiles and excited waves. His stomach reminded him that breakfast had been hours and many miles ago, and the thought of hot coffee and a warm meal felt like exactly what they all needed before the final leg of their journey to the hospital, where they would deliver the donation check they had spent months raising. Betty's family diner appeared ahead, its red neon sign promising comfort and good food, and Marcus signaled the turn into the parking lot, carefully guiding his motorcycle into a space far from the entrance, his companions following suit. Each bike parked with precision to avoid blocking any vehicle or walkway. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. Betty's family diner had stood on the corner of Main Street and Maple Avenue for 32 years, a testament to traditional values and home-cooked meals in a world that Robert Mitchell believed was changing too quickly. The interior glowed with warmth on this Sunday morning. Red vinyl booths lining the windows, their surfaces spotless and gleaming, while the air carried the mingled scents of fresh coffee, sizzling bacon, and cinnamon rolls baking in the kitchen. Robert stood behind the counter, a man in his late 40s whose pressed white shirt and navy slacks were chosen specifically to project authority and respectability, his signature burgundy tie knotted with military precision. He surveyed his domain with the satisfaction of someone who had built something meaningful, his eyes moving from table to table, mentally cataloging every detail that contributed to what he considered the finest establishment in Millbrook. The Sunday morning crowd filled nearly every booth. Families still dressed in their church clothes, elderly regulars occupying their usual spots at the counter, children coloring on paper placemats while their parents enjoyed coffee and conversation. This was exactly how Robert envisioned his diner, a place where good people gathered, where families felt safe, where respectable folks could enjoy a meal without worry or disruption. He prided himself on maintaining standards, on creating an atmosphere that reflected the values he held dear, values of decency and propriety that he felt were disappearing from society. As he straightened a stack of menus near the register, ensuring each one aligned perfectly with the next, he noticed that Table 7 needed water refills and made a mental note to remind Emma, his youngest waitress, about attentiveness to detail. His establishment ran on these small perfectionist touches, the things that separated a mere restaurant from a true community institution. Through the front window, movement caught his attention, and his gaze shifted to the parking lot, where 5 motorcycles were being carefully positioned in the spaces farthest from the building. Robert's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as he watched the riders dismounting, their leather vests and weathered appearances immediately triggering a judgment that formed before conscious thought. His hand moved to adjust his tie, a habitual gesture he performed when he felt his authority or standards might be challenged, and his eyes narrowed as he watched the figures begin walking toward his door. In the corner booth by the east window, the Harper family occupied their usual spot, a tradition they had maintained nearly every Sunday for the past 3 years. 9-year-old Sarah Harper sat quietly beside her mother, her hazel eyes observing everything around her with the kind of awareness that came from someone who had learned early that the world required careful attention. The medical alert bracelet on her left wrist caught the morning light as she reached for her orange juice, the silver chain a constant reminder of the challenges she had faced over the past year, challenges that had made her both more fragile and somehow stronger than other children her age. Her mother, Jennifer Harper, a woman with kind eyes and gentle hands, sat close to her daughter, that protective instinct never quite fading even though the worst days were behind them now. Across the table, Sarah's father David smiled as he cut pancakes for Tommy, Sarah's 6-year-old brother, who was more interested in turning his placemat into an elaborate crayon masterpiece than eating his breakfast. Robert had greeted them warmly when they arrived. Knowing without asking that Jennifer would order the spinach and mushroom omelet, that David preferred his eggs over easy with rye toast, that Sarah liked plain pancakes with strawberries on the side, and that Tommy would inevitably order chocolate chip pancakes and eat maybe half. The Harpers were exactly the kind of family Robert envisioned when he thought about his diner's purpose. Good people raising their children with values, contributing members of the community who appreciated quality and tradition. Sarah sipped her juice slowly, her gaze drifting around the diner with that quiet observation that worried her parents, sometimes that tendency to notice things and feel things more deeply than seemed fair for someone so young. She had always been sensitive, but the medical emergency 6 months ago had somehow amplified that quality, made her more attuned to the emotions and tensions around her. Jennifer squeezed her daughter's hand gently, a gesture of reassurance and connection that had become habit, and Sarah squeezed back, offering a small smile that told her mother she was okay. She was here, she was present in this moment of their Sunday morning tradition that meant more to all of them now than it ever had before. The bell above the door chimed brightly as Marcus pushed it open, holding it for his companions as they filed into Betty's family diner, their presence immediately commanding attention despite their quiet entry. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Forks stopped halfway to mouths, and heads turned toward the doorway where 5 figures stood, silhouetted against the morning sun. Marcus removed his sunglasses first, revealing eyes that crinkled at the corners from years of squinting into wind and weather. His weathered face bearing the lines of 63 years lived largely outdoors. Jake followed, a mountain of a man whose tattooed arms seemed almost incongruous with the gentle way he folded his sunglasses and tucked them into his vest pocket. Tommy, lean and wiry with a gray ponytail, stepped in next, nodding politely to the nearest diners who stared openly. Diane entered fourth, her presence commanding despite her slight frame. Her leather vest decorated with patches that spoke of decades of riding and service. Russell brought up the rear, his wire-rimmed glasses and scholarly demeanor, creating an interesting contrast with his road-worn leather and the graying beard that reached his chest. They stood just inside the entrance, waiting patiently to be acknowledged or seated, speaking in low tones to each other about the diner's welcoming appearance and the promising smell of breakfast. Behind the counter, Robert's entire body stiffened as if he had been struck, his jaw setting into a hard line that made the muscles in his neck stand out against his starched collar. His mind raced with assumptions built on nothing more than appearance. Seeing gang members where there were veterans. Seeing troublemakers where there stood people simply seeking a meal. Seeing a threat to his carefully maintained atmosphere where there existed none. These were not the kind of people who belonged in his establishment. Not among the families and children and respectable citizens who trusted him to maintain a certain standard. Emma, the young waitress with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, grabbed menus from the hostess stand and started toward the bikers with professional courtesy despite the nervous flutter in her stomach, her customer service training overriding her uncertainty. She had taken barely 3 steps when Robert moved, his polished shoes clicking decisively on the tile floor as he intercepted her path, placing a firm hand on her shoulder and taking the menus from her grasp with a look that told her without words to step back, that he would handle this situation personally. Robert approached the group with a smile that never reached his eyes, his posture radiating controlled hostility beneath a veneer of professional courtesy. His voice carried across the suddenly quiet diner as he addressed them with exaggerated politeness that fooled no one. "Gentlemen, ma'am, are you perhaps lost or looking for something specific? Because I'm not sure what brings you to our establishment this morning." Marcus met his gaze steadily, his own voice calm and measured, despite the clear implication in Robert's words. "We'd like breakfast, if you have room for 5. We're happy to wait if there's a delay." Robert's smile tightened, his fingers drumming once against his thigh in barely contained irritation, and the expensive watch on his wrist glinted as he gestured vaguely toward the dining room. "As you can see, we're very busy this morning. Sunday is our busiest day, and I'm afraid all our tables are reserved for expected parties." Jake glanced around the diner, where at least 3 empty booths sat vacant, but said nothing, letting Marcus handle the exchange as they always did. "We noticed some open tables, sir. We don't need anything fancy, just coffee and whatever breakfast you're serving," Marcus replied, his tone remaining respectful despite the obvious dismissal. Robert's veneer cracked slightly, his voice rising just enough to ensure nearby tables could hear clearly. "Those tables are reserved, and quite frankly, I'm not certain we can accommodate your party given our current situation. Perhaps there's another establishment down the highway that might be more suitable for your needs." The contrast between the 2 men could not have been more stark. Robert in his pressed designer shirt and silk tie, his manicured hands and polished appearance speaking of careful cultivation, while Marcus and his companion stood in worn leather that bore the stains and scars of thousands of miles, their clothes practical and weathered, their faces honest and open. Around the diner, reactions varied. Some customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, recognizing the injustice unfolding but saying nothing, while others nodded slightly in agreement with Robert, their own prejudices confirmed by his actions. Diane stepped forward slightly, her voice quiet but firm. "Sir, we just want breakfast. We've been riding since dawn, and we have a long way to go. We'll be quick, and we'll be respectful." Robert's face flushed slightly, his authority being questioned in his own establishment, and his voice rose another notch, drawing the attention of every remaining person who hadn't already been watching. "I've explained the situation, and I really must insist that you find somewhere else. We cater to a certain clientele here, families and local residents, and I have to think of their comfort." Robert's mask of professionalism finally shattered completely, and the words that came next revealed the ugliness he had been barely concealing. "Let me be perfectly clear. I run a family establishment here. We have standards. We have a certain atmosphere that our customers expect and deserve, and quite frankly, your presence here is disruptive to that atmosphere." His hand swept dramatically toward the dining room, where children sat with their parents, where elderly couples sipped their coffee. "Look around you. Do you see anyone else dressed like you? Do you see anyone else who looks like they just rolled out of some roadhouse? Because I don't, and there's a reason for that." Marcus took a slow breath, his voice remaining steady even as his companions shifted behind him. "Sir, we're just travelers looking for a meal. We're not here to cause any trouble. We'll eat quietly and be on our way. We're just hungry people." Robert's laugh was sharp and humorless, his voice dripping with condescension. Hungry people, that's rich. You come roaring up on those machines, dressed in leather and chains, covered in who knows what kind of markings, and you expect me to believe you're just innocent travelers. My customers have children here. Families who come here because they know this is a safe, respectable place. His eyes moved deliberately over each of them, cataloging and judging every detail with cruel precision. Your clothes are dirty and worn. Those motorcycles outside are loud and aggressive, and your whole lifestyle screams the kind of element we don't want in a place like this. The words hung in the air like poison, and his final statement landed with deliberate weight. People like you don't belong in a place like this. You belong out on the highway or in whatever bars will have you, not in my diner where decent families are trying to enjoy their Sunday breakfast. Around the dining room, the silence was suffocating. Most customers stared at their plates or their hands, uncomfortable but unwilling to speak. While a few older men nodded in grim agreement, their own prejudices validated by Robert's boldness, Emma stood frozen near the kitchen door, her young face twisted with distress, wanting to say something but terrified of losing the job she desperately needed. Marcus's weathered face remained composed, but something flickered in his eyes, a hurt that ran deeper than anger. And beside him, Jake's massive hands clenched once before, deliberately relaxing, while Diane's jaw tightened and Tommy looked at the floor. Russell's scholarly face flushing with shame that wasn't his to bear. Robert crossed his arms over his chest, his posture radiating finality as he delivered his ultimate demand with the confidence of a man who believed himself completely in the right. I'm going to ask you one more time to leave my establishment immediately. And if you don't, I will have no choice but to call the sheriff's office, and I want you to know that Sheriff Patterson is a personal friend of mine. We play golf together every Thursday, so I can assure you that any call I make will be taken very seriously. The threat hung in the air with unmistakable clarity, the implication that these outsiders would find no sympathy from local law enforcement, that they were unwelcome not just in this diner, but in this entire town. Marcus held up one hand in a gesture of peace, his voice carrying the weariness of someone who had faced this kind of treatment before, but hoped each time might be different. Sir, if we can't eat inside, would you be willing to let us order something to go? We'll pay in advance. We'll wait outside. We just need some food for the road ahead. Robert's response was immediate and cutting, his head shaking before Marcus even finished speaking. I won't serve you at all. Not inside, not outside, not in any capacity. I want you off my property entirely, now, before I make that call. Jake, Tommy, Diane, and Russell all turned their eyes to Marcus, waiting for his decision, their trust in his leadership absolute even in this moment of humiliation. Marcus looked at each of his friends, seeing in their faces the same hurt and frustration he felt, but also their willingness to follow whatever choice he made. He took a deep breath, the kind that steadied a person before accepting an unpleasant reality, and gave a single, small nod. Their shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly, a collective release of hope for something as simple as breakfast and basic human dignity. And they began to turn toward the door, their movements slow and deliberate, refusing to give Robert the satisfaction of seeing them rush or appear guilty. The atmosphere in the diner had become unbearable, thick with tension and unspoken discomfort. Every fork and knife motionless on every table, every conversation abandoned, every eye fixed on the scene unfolding before them. In the corner booth by the east window, Sarah Harper had been watching everything with an intensity that made her small hands ache from gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white, her heart pounding as she recognized something that the adults around her seemed unable or unwilling to see. Sarah stood up suddenly in her booth, her movement so abrupt that her glass of orange juice wobbled dangerously before settling. Jennifer reached out instinctively, her voice gentle but concerned, as she tried to guide her daughter back to safety. Sarah, honey, please sit down. But Sarah pulled away from her mother's touch with a gentleness that was nonetheless firm. Her entire focus locked on the 5 figures moving toward the exit, and nothing in that moment could have stopped her from what she needed to do. She stepped out from the booth, a small figure in a pale blue Sunday dress with white flowers embroidered on the collar, her legs looking impossibly thin as they carried her forward. Every head in the diner turned from the bikers to this child, confusion and curiosity, replacing the uncomfortable tension that had filled the room moments before. Robert noticed the movement, his irritation at this new interruption evident in his sharp tone. "Young lady, please sit down. This doesn't concern you." Sarah didn't acknowledge him, didn't even glance in his direction, her hazel eyes fixed on Marcus with an expression far too serious for a 9-year-old girl. Jennifer and David sat frozen in their booth, their hands half extended, uncertain whether to stop their daughter or trust that she knew what she was doing, trust that whatever had compelled her to stand had purpose behind it. Sarah walked forward through the aisle between tables, her small feet steady despite the trembling in her hands, and the medical alert bracelet on her left wrist caught the morning sunlight streaming through the windows, the silver chain glinting as she moved. She positioned herself directly between the bikers and the door, her tiny frame creating a barrier that was more symbolic than physical but somehow carried enormous weight. Marcus and his companions stopped, their expressions shifting from resignation to gentle confusion, unsure why this child had placed herself in their path. Sarah's face was serious in a way that childhood faces should never have to be, determined and resolute, fighting back emotions that threatened to overwhelm her small body, her chest rising and falling with breaths that came too quickly, her eyes beginning to shine with tears she refused to let fall. Sarah looked directly at Marcus, her eyes meeting his with recognition and something deeper, something that transcended words. And then she turned her gaze to Robert, her small chin lifting with a courage that seemed to fill her entire being. Her voice, when it came, was clear and strong, carrying across the diner with a volume that seemed impossible from such a small frame. Each word pronounced with careful deliberacy, so that no one, not a single person in that room, could miss what she was saying. "These men saved my life." The impact was instantaneous and absolute, as if time itself had stopped moving, as if the entire world had been placed on pause. Complete silence descended, deeper than before, a silence so profound that the ticking of the clock on the wall became audible, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen suddenly prominent. Every person in that diner froze exactly where they were, forks suspended in midair, coffee cups held halfway to lips, bodies turned toward the small girl whose words had just shattered every assumption in the room. Robert's face transformed, the righteous certainty draining from his expression to be replaced by confusion that warred with the first creeping hint of concern, his mouth opening slightly as if to speak, but no words emerging. Marcus's weathered features shifted entirely, recognition dawning as he truly looked at the girl before him, and his expression melted into warmth, his eyes crinkling at the corners with a smile that held relief and joy and surprise all at once. Behind Sarah, Jennifer and David Harper sat with identical expressions of shock, their faces suddenly understanding what their daughter was doing, why she had felt compelled to stand, and Jennifer's hand flew to her mouth as tears spilled instantly down her cheeks. Throughout the diner, people leaned forward in their seats, every person desperately needing to hear more, to understand what this child meant, how these rough-looking strangers could possibly have saved her life. Emma stood near the kitchen, both hands now covering her mouth, her eyes wide and brimming with tears that she didn't fully understand yet. The moment stretched and suspended, hanging in the air like the pause between lightning and thunder, everyone waiting for the explanation that would either confirm or deny the earth-shattering claim this 9-year-old girl had just made. The sentence that had stopped everything and everyone, the words that had changed the entire atmosphere from judgment to anticipation in the space of 5 simple words. Sarah's voice grew stronger now, the initial fear of speaking up replaced by the need to tell the truth, to make everyone understand what these people meant to her and her family. It was 6 months ago. We were on a road trip, driving through the mountains on Highway 43, and I had a diabetic seizure, a really bad one. Her small hands moved to the medical alert bracelet on her wrist, touching it as if drawing strength from the reminder of what she had survived. We were on a remote part of the highway. There was no cell phone service, and my parents were panicking because I wasn't waking up, and they didn't know what to do. The words tumbled out faster now, her need to tell the story overwhelming any remaining nervousness. These men, these exact same men, they came riding up behind us and saw our car stopped on the side of the road, and they stopped immediately to help. She turned to look at Marcus, her face filled with gratitude that seemed too deep for someone so young. He used to be an army medic, and he knew exactly what to do. He gave me emergency treatment right there on the side of the road, while the others rode ahead to find help because our phones didn't work. Sarah's voice trembled slightly, but she pushed forward. Marcus stayed with me the whole time, talking to me even though I couldn't respond, keeping me stable, and the others formed a convoy when the ambulance came. They escorted us to the hospital, clearing the way so we could get there faster. Diane stepped forward slightly, her own eyes glistening with moisture as Sarah continued. This woman, Diane, she stayed with my mom in the waiting room, held her hand, kept her from falling apart when the doctors were working on me. Sarah's voice softened with the memory. When I woke up in the hospital, Marcus was there, checking on me, making sure I was okay. And they all visited me while I was recovering. They brought me a stuffed bear that I still sleep with every night. Jennifer Harper could no longer remain seated, rising from the booth with tears streaming freely down her face, her voice breaking as she spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. Every single word is true. These people stopped when they had no obligation to stop. They saved our daughter's life when we were helpless and terrified. David stood beside his wife, his arm around her shoulders as she continued. We tried to pay them. We tried to give them money, to do something, anything to show our gratitude. And they refused everything. They just said anyone would have done it, and then they rode away. David Harper's voice was thick with emotion as he added details that made the story even more powerful, his words coming out in a rush, as if he had waited 6 months to say them publicly. Marcus performed CPR on our daughter for 8 minutes straight. 8 minutes of keeping her alive while Jake and Tommy rode 15 miles in opposite directions, looking for cell service to call for help. They gave us their own water, their own supplies, everything they had. His hand shook as he pulled his phone from his pocket, swiping through his photo gallery with urgent fingers. They were on their way to a veterans charity event that day, but they delayed everything to stay with us, to make sure Sarah made it to the hospital, to make sure we were okay. He held up his phone, showing the screen to the nearest table, and the image began to pass from hand to hand through the diner. The photograph showed Marcus sitting beside a hospital bed, his weathered face gentle and smiling, holding a stuffed bear, with Sarah propped up on pillows, pale but alive, grinning at the camera. Another photo showed all 5 bikers crowded into the small hospital room, their rugged appearance contrasting sharply with the sterile medical environment and the soft toys they had brought. David's voice grew steadier as he continued, wanting everyone to know exactly who these people were. Marcus is a decorated Vietnam veteran. He served 2 tours and saved countless lives. Jake is a retired firefighter who spent 30 years running into burning buildings. Tommy was a paramedic for the county for 25 years. He gestured toward Diane and Russell. Diane is an intensive care unit nurse who still works night shifts at County General, and Russell teaches 5th grade and coaches youth soccer. Jennifer picked up where her husband left off, her voice still tear-soaked but clear. Those patches on their jackets, they say veterans charity riders. They're not a gang. They're people who spend their weekends and their own money riding across the state to raise funds for children's hospitals. Marcus stepped forward slightly, his voice quiet but audible. We're actually on our way to Millbrook General Hospital right now. We're delivering a donation check, money we've spent the last 6 months raising through rides and events. The reality settled over the diner like a wave, the full picture finally visible to everyone. A picture of 5 people who dedicated their free time and resources to helping others, who had saved a little girl's life and asked for nothing in return, who had been judged and humiliated for nothing more than their appearance by a man who claimed to value decency and goodness. The atmosphere in the diner transformed so completely and suddenly that it felt like a physical shift, as if the air itself had changed composition, heavy shame replacing the uncomfortable tension that had filled the room moments before. Faces throughout the dining room crumbled with realization. Some customers openly crying, others staring at their hands with expressions of profound regret for their silence, for their complicity in the injustice they had witnessed. An elderly man in a worn cardigan, one of Robert's most loyal regulars for over 20 years, stood slowly from his seat at the counter and walked with deliberate steps toward Marcus, his weathered hand extended. "Thank you for your service, son. And forgive us for our silence." Marcus shook his hand, his own eyes bright with emotion, and suddenly others were standing, moving forward, a wave of people approaching the bikers to offer thanks, to apologize for saying nothing when they should have spoken, to express shame for their own prejudgments. Children who had supposedly been frightened now tugged at their parents' hands, asking to meet the heroes, to see the motorcycles, and parents who had clutched them close moments ago now guided them forward with encouraging nods. The bikers received the attention with grace but obvious discomfort, unused to being treated as heroes. Jake's massive frame somehow seeming smaller as he accepted a handshake from a teenage boy, Diane wiping her eyes as a mother hugged her, Russell smiling gently as a young girl asked about his patches. In the center of it all, Robert Mitchell stood completely frozen, his face drained of every drop of color until he looked almost gray, his hands trembling visibly at his sides as the full weight of his mistake crashed down upon him like a collapsing building. Everything he had said, every judgment he had made, every cruel word he had spoken, all of it had been directed at heroes, at people who embodied everything he claimed to value, and he had done it publicly, performed his prejudice like a righteous act in front of his entire customer base. His reputation, carefully cultivated over 3 decades, was crumbling in real time. His pride shattered, his self-image as a pillar of the community revealed as hollow and poisoned by bias. Near the kitchen, Emma stood with both hands covering her face, tears streaming between her fingers as she repeated over and over, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't speak up. I'm so sorry." Robert tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing several times before any sound emerged, and when words finally came they were stuttering and broken, barely coherent fragments of what might have been an apology. "I didn't. I never." "You have to understand that," I thought. Trailing off into silence as he realized there was nothing he could say that would undo what he had done, no words that could erase the cruelty he had displayed so publicly. Marcus looked at him with an expression that held no anger, only a deep disappointment that somehow felt worse than rage would have been. "Sir, assumptions hurt people. They damage communities, and appearance means absolutely nothing about a person's character. Nothing about their worth, nothing about whether they deserve basic human dignity." His words were quiet, but they carried to every corner of the diner, simple truth that needed no embellishment. "We're used to this, unfortunately. But that doesn't make it right. And it doesn't make it hurt any less." David Harper stepped forward, his face flushed with anger that he directed entirely at Robert. "We will never set foot in this establishment again, and I will make sure everyone in Millbrook knows what happened here today. How you treated people who saved my daughter's life, how you judged them without knowing a single thing about who they are." Other customers joined in, voices rising in agreement, declaring that this wasn't the kind of town they wanted Millbrook to be, that this wasn't acceptable, that they too would be reconsidering their patronage. Robert's carefully maintained authority collapsed entirely, his shoulders sagging as if all the strength had left his body. Please let me make this right. Your meals are free, all of you, anything you want. I'll donate to your charity. Marcus held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. We'll find somewhere else to eat, somewhere we're actually welcomed, not just tolerated out of guilt. Sarah Harper walked forward then, her small arms wrapping around Marcus's waist in a hug that held 6 months of gratitude. And she whispered words meant only for him. Thank you again for saving me. Marcus knelt down to her level, his weathered hands gentle on her shoulders. You stay healthy, little one. Keep that bracelet on, and remember that you're stronger than you know. The 5 bikers moved toward the door, with their dignity intact. Their heads held high, despite everything, leaving behind a diner full of people who would never forget what they had witnessed. 3 months had passed since that Sunday morning, and Betty's family diner looked noticeably different in ways both visible and invisible. The lunch rush on this Tuesday brought perhaps half the customers it once would have, many former regulars having chosen to take their business elsewhere, their absence a daily reminder of consequences that couldn't be undone with simple words. Robert moved through the quieter dining room with a heaviness that had become familiar. Online reviews mentioning the incident still appearing weekly despite his attempts to respond to each one, his business suffering in ways that went beyond mere finances to strike at the core of who he had believed himself to be. The past 3 months had forced a reckoning he couldn't escape. Long nights questioning every assumption he had ever made, every judgment he had passed based on nothing more than appearance, seeing his own prejudice clearly for the first time and hating what he saw. The bell above the door chimed and Robert glanced up automatically, then froze as 5 familiar figures entered. The same leather vests, the same weathered faces, and panic seized his chest before being replaced by something else. A determination born from months of reflection and genuine change. He approached them before they could turn to leave, his hands trembling but his voice steady. "Please, I know I have no right to ask, but please let me apologize properly, not the pathetic attempt I made before, but a real apology for real harm." Marcus studied him with guarded eyes, but nodded once, willing to listen if nothing else. Robert's words came carefully, specifically. "I judged you based solely on appearance. I humiliated you publicly. I denied you basic dignity. And I was wrong, completely and inexcusably wrong. There's no justification for what I did, and I've spent 3 months understanding just how deep my prejudice ran." He gestured around the diner where a new sign hung prominently near the entrance reading, "All welcome here," and photos lined one wall showing the veterans' charity riders at various community events. "I've started training sessions for my staff on unconscious bias. I've partnered with your organization to make this a regular stop on charity rides, and I've been working with community groups to address discrimination." Marcus's expression softened slightly, seeing genuine change rather than empty promises. "Actions matter more than words," he said quietly, and Robert nodded. "I know, and I'm trying every day to do better, to be better, to make sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else in my establishment." 1 year had passed since that transformative Sunday morning, and Betty's family diner had become something entirely different, something better than it had been in all its 33 years of operation. The walls now displayed military and first responder memorabilia, photographs of veterans and community heroes, including a prominent place of honor for a picture of 5 bikers with a small girl in a hospital bed, her smile radiant despite her pallor. The bikers had become regular visitors, stopping by at least twice a month, greeted by name and treated like the family they had proven themselves to be. Sarah Harper, now 10 years old and thriving, had become a passionate advocate for diabetes awareness, raising money through school events and community programs, and on special occasions she rode as a passenger in the charity group's convoy, her laughter audible even over the rumble of engines. Robert Mitchell had undergone a transformation that went beyond surface changes. Speaking at community events about prejudice and the danger of assumptions, sharing his own story of bias and change with raw honesty that inspired others to examine their own hearts. The diner hosted monthly fundraisers for the veterans' charity riders, community members gathering to support the organization that had proven what true service looked like. Emma, no longer the frightened young waitress but now assistant manager, trained every new staff member personally on the importance of treating every single person with respect and dignity, regardless of appearance. The impact had spread beyond the diner's walls, other businesses in Millbrook following the example, creating a community culture of genuine inclusiveness rather than mere tolerance. On this particular Wednesday afternoon, the door chimed and a group of travelers entered, their appearance marking them as different, their clothing and language suggesting they were far from home, and every eye in the diner turned to watch what would happen next. Robert looked up from the register and his face broke into a genuine smile, warm and welcoming. "Good afternoon. Welcome to Betty's. Please come in and make yourselves comfortable. We're so glad you're here." The travelers relaxed visibly, taking seats as Emma brought menus and water with efficient kindness. Judgments based on appearance poison communities and damage the souls of those who make them. Everyone deserves dignity and the basic respect of being seen as a human being rather than a stereotype. True character is revealed through actions, not appearance. Through choices made when it would be easier to look away. Through the courage to speak truth even when your voice shakes. A 9-year-old girl possessed that courage when adults remained silent, her honesty shattering prejudice and transforming an entire community. When you witness injustice, will you speak up or will you remain silent? Will you stand for what is right or will you protect your own comfort? Look at the assumptions you carry. Examine the judgments you make before knowing someone's story. Recognize that heroes come in all forms and often wear the faces you least expect. Kindness costs nothing, but its absence costs everything. Understanding requires effort, but ignorance guarantees harm, and the choice to see people as individuals rather than stereotypes creates the kind of world where everyone belongs.